good morning to those of you joining us from the U.S., Canada, and Latin America. Good afternoon to those in Europe and Africa, and I guess I was going to say good evening, but it's midnight, or past midnight, so good morning, early morning, to anyone joining us from Asia and Australia. As Susan said, my name is Dave Broderick, and I've worked doing some global work the last, I guess, since August 2002. And in putting together this webinar, I was trying to focus on helping people understand if they're thinking about going offshore, if they've just started going offshore, you know, some of the key elements that are necessary to be addressed to enable you to be successful. I've done this webinar a couple of times, and based on feedback that I've received, I realized that even people that have been doing this for years, including myself, always getting someone's different perspective, their learnings, their solutions is very beneficial to share, because as we sit here trying to be global leaders, we are dealing with an ever-changing world, not just from a country standpoint, but from a technology standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint. So please feel free. We'll have Q&A after my session today to ask some questions, but also feel free to send anything to my email, issues or questions, or we can start a dialogue on any topic that we can both continue to learn and get better at this. I think we, you know, just like doctors call it a practice, I think from an IT services standpoint, with so many things in flux, we are constantly trying to upgrade our practice and take advantage of everything that we can, every learning that we can. A good place to start is, where are you going to do the work? And I guess many countries are viable options for IT services. One of the resources that we look at is Gartner every year in November publishes their 30 leading locations for offshore services. Normally, at least I'll say in the last 4 out of 5 years, it's a fairly stable group of countries. But this past year, I think there were 8 or 9 changes, people going off, people coming on, a bigger focus on some of the emerging markets like Bangladesh that are getting into IT services. But the most important thing is, you know, why would you go to a certain country? Do the research on what benefits there are and how that aligns with your business strategy, which I'll touch on briefly. For us, for CAI, we are in every country, in every continent except for Africa, but we're looking at projects there. But we mainly perform, and I'll say our main centers are in the Philippines, China, India, and Argentina. I have experience in the Philippines, China, and India. I have not yet had an opportunity to work in Argentina, but hopefully that will come soon. When looking to get started, you know, one of the things is we work with customers, and I talk to my colleagues. The concept of an offshore strategy internally is always, well, yeah, there's a reason that we're doing this, but it is not always obvious to the people impacted by that strategy. So one of the most important things as you get started is to be able to communicate, why are you moving offshore? If a company is mainly located in one city or in one building, it's a bigger change than maybe a company that had a lot of U.S. offices and now has decided to do work in a foreign office versus a U.S.-based office, because a lot of the things that you are doing today have to go across offices. Some of the, I'd say the top 2 reasons for moving work offshore is to lower the budget. You know, can we do some routine work in another country to help us offset our labor costs in the U.S.? But communicating to people, well, how big are you talking about? Are we talking about moving everything? Are we talking about moving a percentage? And as we work with clients, some of the more successful ones have very discreetly said, okay, over the next 2 years, we're going to move 20% of our IT work offshore. And we're going to go to this location. And so this is where 1 and 2 kind of relate to each other, because one of my earliest, my first project in China was because of a company that said, we are going to start to build an R&D center in China. We want to now start putting IT projects in China, and we are looking for partners that will do that as well. And so a lot of the strategy on to which country to pick is where are you doing business today. If you've got a lot of manufacturing plants sitting in China and offices in China, that makes a lot of sense. If you're doing business in Manila, and Manila is a key part of your business strategy or IT strategy because of the call center that you can get there, then Manila is a good choice. And across the board, as we sit with the CIOs and CEOs about their sourcing strategy, it comes down to where are we doing business today, where do we people have on the ground today, and how do we build a support staff in country so that we can not only take advantage of the labor costs maybe for some U.S. work building some of our enterprise systems, but also providing better local support that can take advantage of the existing time zone. Clearly, if you're moving from a U.S.-centric, or I'll say office-centric, to international, you've got to look at your security policies. You've got to look at your infrastructure. But I caution people that don't go by best practices for the most solid infrastructure you can build for offshore activity if the work that you're going to do is non-critical and non-time sensitive. You know, if you're setting up a testing organization in China that is managing a critical application for your business, then you might want security so you don't have to worry about it. But if it's if you're having one of our teams in China was creating reports, not transaction systems, but it was more downstream reports. They were weekly and monthly reports, reflecting back on the operations, but not used to run the operation. The security that's necessary for that is much different than if it's a high-volume, transaction-oriented system that is running your business. So the caution here is look at your current security policies on why they're in place, what are they trying to protect, and when you move that work to another country, do the rules still apply? Is the type of work that you're moving over still need that kind of security? If it does, then definitely use the same security you have in-house. From an infrastructure standpoint, you are trying to lock down the system, obviously, so nobody can get in, but there's also work practices that you can do. And probably the simplest thing, and from a development standpoint, and maybe even from a testing standpoint, is any key piece of that application, whether it's the keystone application that actually runs the business, or whether it's key scripts in what are your formulas for driving some of your manufacturing operations, well, maybe you keep them onshore and move the processes and practices offshore that, quite frankly, are not, even if something does happen, it's not as critical to your business. So you're looking at your infrastructure from a security standpoint, and there's a lot of firms that specialize in that. There's a lot of white papers. There's a lot of work that most Fortune 500 companies do today in the U.S., and Fortune 1000, that easily translates to doing work in another country, but also be smart about the types of projects. So you're talking about a cost. I worked on a project to do development in China, New York, and Wilmington, Delaware. And their original plan was to set up the high-end security at all three sites. As we evaluated exactly how that work is going to flow, what teams had access to what information, we realized that really what you wanted to worry about was where the final testing and where the production systems were, which were in Wilmington, and the other two sites, because we could pull information from there and they couldn't access any further up the chain, we could put in a solution that was very secure but didn't have to have the redundancy that you'd want in your production system or in your final test. And that probably saved $50,000 to $75,000 in hardware and software to be able to set up a very secure environment, but also being smart about the work practices on, well, what can they really access?